with the Lessons Learned podcast. Sorry for the slight delay, folks, but of course I was dealing with some audio issues. It always happens when I had to switch off the machine and boot it up again. For some reason, it doesn't. It wants to take my microphone as my main speakers and disable my microphone when I need to use it as a microphone. It's a whole thing. So sometimes I forget. I have to reboot the whole thing again. For those, I apologize for those who were expecting me to be on a show today. That show got canceled at the last moment. So essentially, there was no stream this afternoon. Either way, I was in someone else's stream, and I didn't stream myself. Although I do want to stream BattleTech real bad because it's a cool little game on the Unity engine. I know everybody's playing Data War.
Yeah.
That's the game right now. But
Yep.
if you're either rushing through Data War or want to play something else in between, take a break, then BattleTech the game probably will be the thing that you want to check. But first, we get to some news, and I just saw a piece of news here that says Nintendo Switch exploit unfixable.
Oh.
Apparently, that is it's a security exploit that let me check. Nintendo.
Is that the one that lets you back up your saves? I know I heard that there's an exploit that makes it to where you can back up saves, which is a feature Nintendo doesn't offer right now.
It opens the door to piracy, apparently.
Hmm.
It has been blown wide open by a fixable hack, according to different sources. And that could be it paves the way for Linux and emulators. I don't know if it's a truly unfixable.
Yeah.
Thanks to the exploit of the core Nintendo Switch firmware, hackers are now running GameCube games and more. It cannot be hacked. That's right. You can now. Well, this is nothing new, really. It's just that it's news in the sense of how readily it happens. Like one of the advantages of consoles is that because first they're closed systems, and second, they're not as popular as PCs. In order for you to hack more modern consoles, you have to go hardware route. You have to hack it through the hardware.
Yeah.
But it is doable. You can mod I see mods of Xboxes, Xbox 360s. In fact, ironically, you can, well, not ironically, you say an Xbox 360 to play GameCube games or play other types of games. Of course, that cuts into the idea of replayability of old titles, rebuying old titles, re-releasing.
Yeah.
So if you can just play your GameCube games on your Switch, then you don't need backwards compatibility, right?
Although you physically can't have backwards compatibility with the Switch since all the media is either disc or cartridge for Nintendo.
Well, yeah, but what happens is if it's cartridges or disc, you can just rip them. They're readers. I mean, you have cartridge readers and stuff like that. I could see a lot of stuff, especially and I know people have these cartridge, like tiny cartridge readers for Nintendo's mobile hardware, right?
Yeah.
So
although the thing is, like most people, most owners of the Switch aren't going to bother trying to figure out how to rip their disc or their or rip their the ROMs off of cartridges so they can play them on their Switch. That's probably way too much effort.
Yeah, there's a specific community that does that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you have you make it easy to mod your Switch so you can use this exploit, I don't think most people are going to go for it.
Yeah. So, but I do think that it's, I think the real problem is confidence in the system, especially by software designers, like game designers. That I think could be the real impact. That they go like, oh, you have this exploit. What else could be exploited in our software that could be copied on the Switch? What happens to our copyright? What happens to our, especially the older stuff that might be licensed to Nintendo or to other platforms as well, right? I think that's where that's the real impact right there. It's confidence on the Switch by game designers, and that's one of the things that Nintendo has been riding high. That unlike the Wii U, a lot of people have been trying to put their games on the Switch. But if it has an exploit like that, then whoopsie, that can be a bit of a problem. Not for users. Ironically, not a lot of users are going to do that, like you just said. But designers are going to take the risk. It's like, well, one of the reasons. Because again, one of the reasons why you launch to consoles are very popular is because clearly they're not impossible to hack, but they're more resistant to it, unlike PC games. So there's that. Other piece of news: Monsieur Cage of Quantic Dreams fame is now suing several newspapers and publications, including the French newspaper Le Monde, The World, for publishing stories that depict his studio and him personally in a negative light, particularly abusive practices carried out by or under the directive banner of Mr. Cage, David Cage, such as racial and ethnic slurs directed at different people or uttered in the office, a hostile environment, the use and abuse of crunch, and other things. I don't think that's gonna work. In fact, what makes it makes Monsieur Cage look worse off, right?
So he's suing them for slander, and he's saying that this is a smear campaign, which I'm not entirely sure what the laws in France are. If they're like the ones in the U.S., maybe the journalism laws are stricter over there. It could be, because the particular thing he's saying is that, we were never contacted by this journalist for this article in terms for us to tell our side of the story to be fair and balanced.
Well, I think the laws are a bit. I think that in the UK, for example, it's much easier to sue publications. Not necessarily to win, but it is easier. The bar to suing them is lower, and of course, it's across different nations and different jurisdictions, so different things. But also, one thing has to know that French labor laws are also far stricter than, for example, American labor laws, both as they're written and as they are executed, because one of the major organs of the French government is, in fact, a union or labor department or part of it. Like you have the presidency, you have the legislature, and then you have like a labor segment. I don't know the specifics of it, which means it gives workers quite a bit of strength because they're literally part of the government, regardless of whose party is running. Although the Macron government has been trying to change labor laws and all that, and some other governments, especially center right and right wing governments, wanted to liberalize the French laws. But then the French are also very quick to jump to the streets and protest, so it hasn't worked for them so far.
It's been going on for hundreds of years of the French revolutions.
They off with their heads, and let them eat cake are just two examples of what can happen when you push the French people a bit too far. They can only take so much. So you could have the bizarre situation where this lawsuit goes through, but if the findings by the government are as a provincial government, I remember it's a province or a department. The department, that's how they call the regions in France are called departments. If the local department where the offices are found, the VKH is working on, fine against the company, they can levy heavy fines, and I think they can only even close the company itself. I'm not really sure how far they can go, but it would be devastating. And of course, the VKH has a game coming out in about 2 months, a game that is supposed to be a Sony exclusive.
Yep.
And Sony is a Japanese company, which they also have their own way of looking at labor and all that. And I don't know if they would want, at least in the international market, particularly in the European market, to be seen to be cooperating with a developer who is less than easygoing with his employees.
Yeah. Well, and even some of his defenses were not very great. It's like, oh, I can't be homophobic. I know someone I've worked with someone who does like who's pro-gay and is an activist for gays. It's like,
Yeah,
okay.
well, part of that defense is that the same developers in David Cage actually, that we're talking about, what's her name?
Ellen Page.
Ellen Page. They actually created a scene and a shower scene with her face at least, where, I mean, they were gonna animate. She was gonna be a shower scene, but she was gonna be like only the face and stuff like that, right? But they created a full nude model for her, and there's a scene where she's a nude model, and she has it in her contracts that she doesn't do any nudity. That includes, and in fact, I think she sued the company, David Cage and the company, because of, they violated her contract, violation of contract, saying that no, I did not authorize for you to use my body image and voice and presence in a nude scene, even if it's an animated scene in a video game. So yeah, David Cage has been in trouble before. He also used excuse of, well, I worked with African American actors and stuff like that. My best friend's second cousin is a queer Native American who does peyote medicinally or something. I mean, that's how it basically comes out. I was like, okay, yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I don't. I honestly don't think that the story or his actions are really gonna hurt the game's release.
No.
At least right now, I don't foresee that unless he does something really crazy or something, or says something really crazy.
Which is always a possibility when you have auteurs.
Yeah,
charge.
I didn't buy their last game, which was Beyond Two Souls. I think the main reason wasn't so much that the game didn't look interesting or anything to do with David Cage. The main reason why is that they were selling a pre-order bonus, which is like a bonus level. It's like, oh, you can only get this level if you pre-order this game from like GameStop. I'm like, no. So you're a story-based video game cutting content as a pre-order mode. Nope, I'm done. I'm not buying your game.
So you don't get the complete experience unless you pre-order, basically. Yep. Yeah, no, that's not gonna fly with me. I think I seen what's Fahrenheit or something like that. The game that has been mimified with Sean.
Oh, that's
Indigo Prophecy.
You're thinking the Sean and the whole Sean thing is Heavy Rain.
No, yeah, but Heavy Rain, I think that's a title in the United States. Oh. And it's Indigo Prophecy everywhere else.
Is it?
I think so. Let me just check.
I think Indigo Prophecy is its own game.
Okay, let me check. Heavy Rain. Quantic Dream Project. Okay. Also another PlayStation exclusive. Whether he just does games for PlayStation. Involved Mystery of the Origami Cheat Killer. Okay, let me see what Wikipedia has to say about it. It usually has it will probably name if it has any
alternate titles.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just funny that
Fahrenheit was a previous game. I think that one might have been also Indigo Prophet. I think I'm mixing the two. And it's a cinematic. This is how yeah, Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit was a game that was known as Indigo Prophecy in North America. It's a cinematic drama action adventure video game.
Yeah, I think that was their first forte into the whole cinematic experience.
Yeah, and I'm wary of those just by default. As longtime viewers of the show know, I'm like, yeah, no, not so much. By the way, I saw somebody trying to say the same thing about God of War. I'm like, just because something is very linear doesn't make it a cinema or a movie that you play. Anyway, I'm not gonna go into that. I'm not gonna go into that specific because I haven't played God of War. I don't have a PlayStation. I wish I had a PlayStation. I wish I was playing God of War. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun with BattleTech, the game, but God of War looks pretty cool, and the whole series looks pretty cool. Let's see what they've done with it. Talking about things that are being chopped to pieces, and maybe chopped to pieces to death, is The Sims. Recent news from EA is that several people were, not just several people, but as much as nearly 100 people were fired from let go Praxis. from Praxis, one of the makers of the company behind The Sims. And this movement was led by EA. EA, who actually gives BioWare all the support and love and everything, and say, no, you can ask very patiently, can you do it? Can you do it? Yes, of course you can. We're gonna give you a lot of money to do it. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, another company's feeling the heat and probably could get the heated axe soon enough. And it seems that it happening to Sims, which a lot of people are scratching their heads, including ourselves, or especially our friend here, Chapelmon, because The Sims seems to be the poster child for chopping games into little pieces and selling those pieces. In fact, a couple of months ago, there was a release that was characterized in the gaming media as a DLC for a DLC.
Yeah.
But there's also part of the announcement or news is that The Sims might be moved to mobile. And my personal theory, which considering everything that EA has been doing and the AAA industry is going, is that perhaps we might have basically a new game that will be a live service on mobile, which instead of you buying all these packs, which do take considerable time to make, instead you're gonna have essentially all those things be microtransactions on mobile. It might even be a free-to-play game, right? Get the taste of The Sims, a little house and maybe a bathroom or something, right? Yep. You laugh for a little while as you see your Sim naked, crapping in the toilet in the middle of the room, and then you're like, oh, but I wish to have like shower curtains. Well, here's 200 versions of the shower curtains. Each costs 5 cents or 25 cents or $1 or something. Okay, and you start clicking and buying and buying and buying and buying. Next, you have a mansion with a dog and a yard, and you probably spend as much money, much more money that you would spend on The Sims. And by the way, I've seen some estimates, as I was saying before the show started, some estimates at around $200 or more for a complete Sims game.
Yeah,
if you buy all the packages. So
yeah, I think it depends on which versions you're looking at too.
Yeah. Well, the latest one was it lasts like 3 or 4 versions of The Sims. Well, main Sims, because there's also like medieval Sims and sci-fi Sims and all that.
The herbs.
Yeah, but like the main Sims essentially had been the pattern where they launched the game for $60, and then it's like threadbare. Doesn't have anything of the stuff they used to have before. You have to buy all the expansions. In about 2 to 5 years, they get the most out of the game. Then they release a new version with threadbare again, which you cannot use the old expansions because the graphics are just that much better, that much improved. So they're not compatible. So you have to buy all the stuff over again, and on and on and on. So, I know some people who are very addicted to The Sims. I never got into them myself. I don't know.
It was fun to play for a little while, but I get bored of them quickly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I like construction games when they're done well, but after a while, I don't know. Except for doing kind of Machimina or something, I don't see the point after buying spending that much money on something like that. Let me see other pieces of news. Um, oh, Halo. There was a Halo game supported. Well, it was an online Halo experience for PC that was based on a pre-built of a Halo game that never came out to market. 343 shut that down, but in the process said, well, maybe yes, there may be an interest of people playing Halo on PC, and aside from top-down twin stick shooters that we ported from mobile into PC, or maybe the odd RTS, which has truncated controls because they're made for consoles. That's Halo Wars. We might actually put a mainline Halo game back on PC. It's very interesting. And this goes into we're talking about exclusives this unintentionally this week. Is that Halo was a Microsoft exclusive for Xbox OC, Xbox 360, and now the Xbox One and Xbox One X. Although there's no official Halo release for the Xbox One X yet.
Yeah.
Halo 5 was the one for the Xbox One. The thing about it is that it's Microsoft. And Microsoft, for some reason, has been loath to port those games to the PC, perhaps to keep them exclusive to the Xbox and to showcase the power of the Xbox at any one time. In fact, that was kind of the selling point of Halo. Halo was Combat Evolved, the original, because it showcased that you could do a true first-person shooter. Although first-person shooters have been around for a while, since the Nintendo 64, not earlier, on consoles, but not at the same level as PC. But this was Xbox, a console that could do shooters as well as any PC.
Mm-hmm.
And one could argue that it did popularize. It wasn't the first, certainly, but it certainly popularized the idea of FPS on console and made it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I also think it popularized RPGs too.
Mm-hmm.
With like with Morrowind, and you got Jade Empire.
Well, that was on the Xbox Series, right? Especially on Micro, the Xbox really did. Although some of them were shared also with the with PlayStation. Although PlayStation tended to have more Japanese or JRPGs. Like I think in the Xbox OC, one of the things they did, it introduced quite a bit of Western style CRPGs to console. Mm-hmm. Made it actually possible because they had a hard drive and had some for the era, some beefy stats, some beefy hardware. That's more powerful than the PlayStation 2 that came out. But PlayStation 2 was cheaper and other things. But Halo and Halo 2 were basically given to another company to adapt. People have said that the original Halo Combat Evolved version PC was okay. The Halo 2 one was not good. And after that, the only versions of Halo games that we've seen are like secondary games, such as Halo Wars, and I think 2 twin stick shooters that came out mostly for mobile on PC and stuff like that. I guess getting people interested in those platforms, getting interested in Halo so that they would then buy the Xbox.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to have worked very well. Which brings us to tonight's topic, which is transmedia, especially when it comes to video games. We talked about this a little bit before, but now I think we can dedicate about half an hour's worth of baying of dogs in the distance and talking about the subject. I apologize, my neighbors are probably walking one of the dogs, which sets all the other dogs in a frenzy and yada yada yada. So Chapawan, you were keen on talking about this because I was stumped and I didn't know what to talk about this week. So you brought the subject, so take it away.
So, as many of you know from our previous discussion, Mass Effect Andromeda is pretty much an incomplete everything, but mostly the story. It just kind of left like this a bunch of lingering threads just there. With the idea of DLC being patched, and as we all know, Mass Effect Andromeda got the axe from EA. Hey, thank you for letting us try this out. EA, you're so kind. So instead of getting a full DLC on the fate of the Quarian arc, instead are getting a novel, which made me wonder how many people are actually going to read this novel, on top of the people that actually played and enjoyed Andromeda. And come to think of it, there are so many. No, not so many. There's like quite a bit of Mass Effect media that isn't video game based, which raised the question: how many fans actually go out and seek all of this media, and is it worth it? Is it worth it for a company to try to essentially port their IPs to different medias to either draw interest or keep fans interested in it? Mm, I'm kind of trying to remember how much transmedia have I consumed. I've never read any of the Mass Effect novels. I've read like one. I've intentionally went out and seeked one Mass Effect comic book, which was I believe it was Mass Effect Homeworlds, and it just focused on some of the squad members, and obviously I went for the Garrus one. And I watched Paragon Lost, which was terrible. It was terrible. It had so many continuity issues, and the sound effects were wrong. And the thing is, and that just kind of draws attention to itself when you have a game that sells itself on its continuity, when you have a different media exploring, say, a backstory of a character, but then when you play the game and you actually try to compare and contrast, like what is said in the game, which should be like the main focus and probably what should be true, versus what happens in the movie, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense at all.
Well, transmedia when it comes to video games is almost as old as video games. And this, I hate to say this, and I'm showing how, yeah, we're having a bit of an issue here. Comes to transmedia, the and it shows how old I am, I suppose. We've had the Pac-Man Fever back in the day, and I remember vividly Pac-Man Fever. So there were books, there was there were all kinds of things going on, and even cereal, and it was because also Pac-Man turned out to be sort of the first real sort of
like IP that video game mascot.
I mean, mascot that had that, so it took off, and that's one of the things that made mascots like Mario Brothers and Sonic and all that being very popular. But and yeah, I mean, it became a situation where it really showed the effects of that. But in other situations, like the ones you mentioned, it's been very restricted. I know that World of Warcraft, for example, has a ton of tie-in novels, for example. A lot of the lore. A lot of Japanese, especially JRPGs, have ton of manga and books and stuff like that, art books, that sort of thing. There's a trope for it called all there in the manual. It goes back all the way back to the original, a lot of old games. Let me give me a second here. Talking about
essentially all you need to know about a game's backstory is in the manual.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all you have to know. But the thing is, I think what we see in transmedia today is that they try to tie into each other. Back in the day, there was no way that the Pac-Man cartoon was trying to tie back into the lore of the Pac-Man video game, and then the Pac-Man video game is going to reference the Pac-Man cartoon. You don't see that, but whereas now we're trying to get that, not only trying to draw up interest, we're trying to tie it all together. And I think the thing is, it ends up being a result of too many cooks in the kitchen. It's like, well, how do you keep your continuity straight? Like, James Vega, like, he ran into the collectors one time and managed to survive, which is sort of a little bit of retconny from Mass Effect 2. But then you have like this TV series that or this movie that not only shows that he did it, his encounter with it, but he managed to take down the ship, and that's like never referenced. It's like a second collector's ship, and at no point was there ever mentioned of a second collector ship. And as far as it seemed to kind of imply, there's only always one collector ship in Mass Effect 2. It's like, oh, okay, guys. It's like, why the hell is James Vega not like already an M7?
Yeah. I think they wanted to build him up as being badass, and well, well, there's a couple of things. Like I said, all there in the manual. The reason why it used to be there because there wasn't a lot of space on a game to put all the text that goes with it. And a nice pizza. It looks nice. I'm jealous. So you put a lot of the information there, like who the characters are and where they come from and what they're doing, right? It's all in the manual. You read the manual, oh, okay, this is the backstory, and then you play Contra or something, and you shoot, all the aliens in the face, and so on and so forth. But because those manuals and all the tie-in media became very popular in its own right, it tends to happen more and more. Like Final Fantasy 15, one of the criticisms I have of Final Fantasy 15 is that it had a tie-in movie that essentially explains all of the background to the game.
Yeah.
And it seems to imply a completely different relationship to one of the major characters, to some other characters you never see or briefly see. It's like, oh, I guess I do have to watch that that movie in order to understand Final Fantasy 15. I don't think so. I shouldn't have to do that. I follow the rule that is
you shouldn't have to do homework.
Yeah.
To play a video game.
If it's an important detail, it should be in the game.
Yeah.
It's also a question of canonicity, right? You talked about it before. What is the the primary source versus secondary source and stuff like that. I have no problem with transmedia. I think transmedia can be pretty cool, especially when transmedia is other games. But at the same time, it's like you got to be careful with that. I mean, we're also seeing a lot of, for example, mobile ports of games and secondary games like Deus Ex Human Revolution. Mass Effect certainly had these little shorter Halo. We talk about Halo as well, like mobile games. Dragon Age had one as well. But again, some of those things were a bit weird. Like Mass Effect had a top-down twin stick shooter that introduced two significant characters to the series, Miranda Lawson and Jacob Taylor. But they also were like, oh yeah, we worked together in the past. That's it. That's how important it was, right? And then there's actually a pretty cool concept. I think it may have been what they were trying to do with originally with the Mass Effect FPS. And then essentially it ended up as a FPS on mobile, which, unless you have some kind of switch style controls on attached to your mobile device, I don't think it's gonna really work.
Yeah.
Deus Ex Human Revolution also had a mobile spinoff, but then came back to PC. A lot of people said that that's not pretty good. That can actually delude your brand, right? There was a big kerfuffle about one of the or two tie-in novels to Mass Effect.
Yeah,
that people actually hated with a passion.
Yeah, I believe one had like really heavy canon errors. That's in terms like, oh, the previous book two like took place 2 years ago, and it's a continuity thing, and then it's like, but there's this 10-year-old kid in book 1, but book 2 he's suddenly like 25, even though it's only been 2 years.
Yeah. And stuff like that even carries over to Andromeda. One could argue that Andromeda in many ways is sort of a spin-off from the original Mass Effect series, and it heavily retconned the original series, And for people who didn't care, right, who want their fan service is fine, but people who, like myself, I guess I can only speak for myself,
Yeah.
Are stickler to canon is like, okay, this is a thing. So the question is, what can you do with transmedia, right? Where can you go? I mean, what do you? I'm gonna ask you, Chapelmon, and in the audience, chat. What do you find acceptable as sort of transmedia spin-offs?
Well, I've noticed that a lot of newer video games have these tiny. They try to make like sort of short movies. I believe there is one for Dead Rising 2. I think it was like two brothers, and they were trying to get like medicine and escape the zombie horde. There was one recently for Far Cry, which is a very short, like half an hour movie, I believe, which I hear wasn't all that great. Dragon Age had Dragon Age Redemption, which was, I say it's probably almost an hour long. It's in multiple parts, which I actually thought was pretty good if you could get past some of the technical shortcomings of the film. But in terms of that, I think some of it, I think in terms of the first two, it doesn't really add anything to the game. Oh, but with like, say, Dragon Age Redemption, that did lead to a DLC, which it's kind of odd because if you think of it, sort of like a spin-off DLC, a DLC for a spin-off into the core lore of the game, which is actually kind of interesting that the transmedia could sort of add on to itself.
Yeah, and a character that it would have been pretty cool to see, for example, in Inquisition.
Yeah,
particularly in Trespasser, but I think she gets mentioned in passing, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So,
and then actually, I've enjoyed some of the other characters they added in that series. It's like, oh hey, like I could sort of see some of them making cameos in newer installations of Dragon Age. But I think it raises the question: is it worth it for a lot of these gaming companies? EA, like I believe they heavily tried to make something that probably should have stayed a niche market, and that'd be Dead Space, into transmedia. They tried making cartoons, they made spin-off shows. I think there might have been a comic series. I played the first one. I've never played any of the other ones, but I did end up picking up this. I'm trying to think of how I would describe it. It's sort of a spin-off mini game that's sort of a prequel to the second one, where it's like a choose your own adventure comic book with some puzzles thrown in there. And it sort of leads up to the character of that game finding Isaac, the main character of Dead Space, in like cryo or in some psychiatric ward. And like I almost feel like this is completely irrelevant because it leads to hard choices. Your side character always dies no matter what path you take, and in some it kind of contradicts the main character's intention, because the main character is sort of a unreliable narrator, because he has his other motives that aren't revealed to the player, even though you're playing as him. And it wasn't very good.
I think part of the problem is that video game companies, especially the developers themselves, right? They're the ones who have, especially like when you're working for Microsoft or EA, they're not the people with the money, right? And they don't have, I mean, they may have work with voice actors and even do motion capture, but that's not exactly the same thing as doing a movie by itself, right? There's certain things that for making a movie or making other things, there are specific skills that are not one-to-one transferable to video game design or vice versa, regardless of what people like say. Oh, I don't know, Monsieur Cage might tell you otherwise. Some other people might tell you that, but I seen some very interesting transmedia. For example, Halo has a bunch of spin-off games. Some of them are good, some of them not. I really like ODST. That was a pretty cool spin-off game. And they also did a basically animation collection, very similar to the Animatrix, in which basically they had probably they were also inspired by probably the Animatrix. They took a group of 3 to 4 Japanese animators and said, okay, create a story with the themes and ideas and the looks and tie it into the Halo universe. And so some of them were pretty wacky. One story was a Dragon Ball style story, right, where you had the another Spartan come in and do some very crazy things, and these kids who also supposedly had superpowers as well, and it was pretty wacky. You have another one where you have another Spartans infiltrating a fleet, and there's these massive battles, right? And then you had one which was the one Arbiter versus, and I think that was the same one where there was a 1-to-1 kind of thing going on, and those are pretty cool. I mean, Halo also had like before Halo 4 had a short mini video series, kind of like a short film. Really, was a couple of episodes on the internet. Was a live action thing where they're introducing the new, especially one character and their background, their connection with Spartan 117, which is John 117, the Master Chief in Halo, and he happens to become the sort of the leading officer in Halo 4, non-Spartan one, and it was pretty cool, right? The look of it was, well, when the Spartans show up with their armor, it looks very much cosplay, right? It looks a little bit plasticky. That's, I think, what they use, dark lights and stuff like that to hide the fact that this is, this armor doesn't look like this. And there's also I think there was an attempt to make a Halo movie, and it looked pretty cool, right? What we saw of it, and pieces of it are floating around in the internet. And of course, the biggest piece of transmedia when it comes to video games is movies.
Yeah, feature films. And then I don't really consider that in terms of like transmedia. Usually spin-off movies or theatrical versions of them don't really try to stay within the lore, which is kind of interesting. They mostly, I feel they try to dilute themselves to a general audience kind of thing. And in a way, you end up losing what makes that video game good. And of course, movies aren't video games and video games aren't movies. So then you got that adaptation issue, because you have to condense things that would take you hours and hours of character development and motivation and plot, and try to condense it down to 2 hours, 3 if you're lucky.
And also, I think the main engagement in a video game is the player, right? The player playing the game.
Yep.
Right. The emotions come from what they see, when they see it, their reactions to what's going on, their what they can do and what they cannot do, right? Versus in a movie, just watching something else. Like, I think a pretty successful one, and that's why most video game movies really have been not very successful. The latest one was Rampage, and considered one of the most successful ones. And I think there was a tweet where The Rock said, "Yeah, this one is a great achievement. I think it cracked 39% or 33% in Rotten Tomatoes." And he said, like, "Oh, this is great because the last one I was in was Doom, and that was a stinker."
Yeah.
And the people in Bethesda were like, "Dude, Dwayne, what the hell? What are you doing to us?" Right?
Yeah. No, I guess we're gonna have to make our own movie based on our new Doom game, which I think is a thing that's happening.
Yeah, probably. And I think that one might work because how wacky that the new Doom is, and I think one of the reasons why the Doom movie wasn't very good was it tried to be an adventure, Hollywood adventure, but also be kind of somewhat serious. And I think what's very interesting is that video game movies about video games like Wreck-It Ralph are better than movie adaptations.
Yeah, but then again, Pixels wasn't very good.
Yeah, I think
that has its own can of worms. It's
yeah, and I mean, I remember, for example, reading. I'm playing BattleTech right now, BattleTech the game, which is kind of transmedia in the reverse, right? It's a tabletop RPG and two games, tabletop RPG version, but really it's a tabletop tactical game ported over to many successful video games, including Mech Warrior series and the like. But again, it's because the computer you can simulate the rules, right? And you can take it further than that. So I think it works in that sense. But BattleTech also had a animated series with a lot of CGI. It didn't last long. A couple episodes, and it has a ton of tie-in novels. But I remember reading a couple of those novels, and I think I'm going to say this, although it's not talking about directly about video games, but it kind of highlights some of the problems of transmedia. Different media have different strengths and weaknesses. Is that when I was reading the novel, written by Michael Stackpole, who also worked on earlier BattleTech games. I think he worked on BattleTech, the Crescent Moon Inception, or Crescent Moon something other. It's an all Amiga Commodore 64 game. When he was talking about the politics and the characters and personalities and the intrigue, that was pretty cool. The moment he started describing actual mech fights, it got boring really fast. It was like a blow for blow. It's like, I stun this, and this guy fires a Azure laser thing and hits the armor and burns a part of the armor, and the other guy fires a autocannon and hits on the shoulder, and da. He was trying to... It's like trying to do a commentary of a match, right?
Yeah.
And which now brings me an idea. Well, I'll keep them. I hope I don't forget. It was very boring because you could almost hear the rattling of the die on the felt top, right? And go like, okay, he rolled 2 6s or whatever, and hit this, and rolled this percentage, and hit that armor piece, that kind of thing. There's even one part which was of Redfall, which is a mech versus a Aerotech, which is basically a fighter, but kind of built in this universe, so they have heavy armor and all that. And it's supposed, you imagine this fighter plane going very fast and throwing bombs and missiles, whatever. No, it's like the guy shot at him, and the thing went around, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so uninteresting. But that reminded me, talking about commenting a game. There is one piece of transmedia I think people tend to forget when talking about transmedia, and it's competitive video game play. If you think about it, that is transmedia, because often competitive play is set up by the companies to support their games.
Yeah.
And it's on television or on stream, and the main experience is not you playing the game, it's just watching other people play the game.
Yeah.
And they're extremely successful. And I think they are successful because they stem from something that happened all the way back to the arcades, right? That playing a video game and also streaming and all that stuff is part of this. It can also be performative. So they're not really seeing the game. They're seeing someone play the game and the performance of them playing that game.
Yeah. It's like standing next to, like, back in the days where people would gather around, watch two people play on or if it's a single player one, watch a person play one cabinet and be like, oh my god, and once they're done, it would probably still get people to like, I want to try that game, let me go pop some quarters in there and try it myself.
And it works in the same principle. Of course, now we're talking about a multi-million-dollar industry on its own. I mean, StarCraft, to the point that Blizzard now wants to make every game they have, a competitive game.
Yeah.
And they re-released the original StarCraft so that they could get that hype back in Korea, because in South Korea it was the biggest game ever, right? and Overwatch has a competitive aspect. Hearthstone has a competitive aspect. I think a couple of other games that PUBG wants to go competitive as well, right? Not everybody succeeds, but I think that's one aspect of transmedia that really is growing because it's combining television. Well, it's not as popular in television. I think ESPN has tried it, but it doesn't exactly fit the format of like a football game or a basketball game, which those games have evolved to adapt to television and vice versa. And this streaming is transmedia because it's not technically gaming, so it's a different thing. Those tournaments do much better on the live and streaming side of things, where you can jump in and out whenever it's happening, and oh, this guy's playing, okay, and you can go back and have a VOD and something. You feel like you have more control of your experience, unless you're there live, in which case you just watch it live. But I think that might be, now that I think about it, the most successful transmedia experience that video games have, alongside Let's Plays and streaming.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I didn't even think of that as a form of transmedia, but you're right. It's probably going to be something that the game developers are going to keep an eye on and try to push, because I think that might be the most, probably the most like transmedia that would actually draw up more attention and get people to buy and play your game, as opposed to a comic book like, oh, these characters look interesting, but I'm not really into gaming, so I'm not going to go out and buy a console and buy a game and to play this game and see these characters do stuff.
Yeah, I think in other situations it fails because people who might be into comic books, let's say, may or may not, but they're not into video games. It's like, well, why do I want to read a comic about Warcraft if I don't play Warcraft? And people who play the game might say, okay, only people who are sort of very deep into the lore and into the game itself and want to have more information, they want to have the manual, will buy the extra stuff. But then we run into the whole situation of conflicts and rewriting history, and every time you have a new author, they do their own interpretation of characters or introduce new characters, or like I see that a lot as well, like in the idea that, oh, you're gonna have these other characters for this side story, but because we don't want to mess with the main characters of the video game, but we got to find a way to sort of put them together. And usually it's a situation where they come in and I found the main character, so basically the entire story was about that character in the first place, but they don't do anything, and your character is like a just there to introduce the character.
Your character doesn't matter. And I think they sort of did that. BioWare did a few of some of those characters like that in their transmedia. I've heard Kyle Lang has a little more personality in his story. Cole, which I didn't really care much for from Dragon Age Inquisition, is actually a book character. He's in some sort of novel as well.
It's his background. His whole story when he talks about that he was in the tower and he took the body of the person and he was walking with some people. Basically, that's the story. Cassandra also had an animated series, an animated movie, short film.
It wasn't very good either.
Yeah, the animation was a bit off. And in many ways, she's also kind of an immigrant because she appeared on Dragon Age 2 as a background character and then became a main character or principal NPC in Dragon Age Inquisition. And I love Cassandra. I really do. So that was a good one. Alongside Varric as well. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like looking back, transmedia that is able to capture the overall gaming experience, either as somebody who watches other people play or being a player itself or close to it, I think is going to be the most successful ones. Others are just going to have to adapt. And I think ultimately it depends how, like you said earlier, how much money and effort are you really willing to spend on it? And who are you going to put in charge of this? I mean, I'm thinking that, and I'm sure there's some people with the title, but not to the extent that I'm going to describe, because I think as we move in video games become more and more popular, of course, and they're already very popular, and more companies push for more transmedia across the board, you're going to need some people who are going to be like mega editors.
Yeah. like a canon or like lore keepers of some
yeah,
sort.
exactly. Kind of. Well, I think Star Wars have had people like that. Star Trek sometimes. I mean, because it's the only way to sort of wrangle everything so that it fits more or less together. Because every time you bring a new author, you bring a director, an author, writers, actors into a project, especially if they're not familiar with either the original medium or the particular game, right? You're like, oh yeah, I want you to play an admiral or a captain or something. Like, okay, I'll play that, but I never done voice acting in a video game, stuff like that. Or the opposite, you take people from a video game industry, you're like, okay, you go ahead and make a short film or something. You're like, yeah. Well, we have the studio here, right? You know.
But I think the makers of Heavenly Sword tried doing that, and it was terrible too.
Mm-hmm. And then you have your mishmash that comes from like anything that comes out of either David Cage's production studio or Kojima Productions.
Mm-hmm.
With different results depending on your taste and any given product to begin with, right? I actually would like to see more. Well, I guess you can consider transmedia in the sense I'd like to see more spin-off games. Like Ubisoft is actually pretty good at doing spin-offs. Blood Dragon was a good spin-off of Far Cry. I consider it to be like the best Far Cry game I played so far. And that in turn had a spin-off which wasn't a Far Cry game. It was sort of a sequel with the kids from the main characters in the first game. And I think it was a racing game. Like a side-scrolling racing game. They've done side-scrolling games from the and even smaller games for Assassin's Creed, and the Japanese, especially with JRPGs, they literally have dozens, hundreds of examples of like complete spin-off series who sort of become their own game to the point where nobody remembers the original game.
Yeah.
Do people, probably half of the people who played a Persona game, especially who played Persona 5, don't realize that Persona games are a spin-off of Cinema. I forgot the name. I can't pronounce
it. They're spin-off of some other
game, which they have overshadowed. And that's a cool thing. Persona, well, I guess Persona, because already Persona has has anime sections. And they're very plot-driven games, right? They're a mixture of visual novel with a tactical, JRPG combat. They also have very popular animes as well. Like I watched the anime for Persona 4. And I know the Persona 5 one is out, but not translated yet. Or maybe subtitled, but not, translated in English. I watched the Persona 4 actually with good voice acting. I know people, subs, not dubs. Sub, not dub. Like, if you got a good sub, good dub, they're pretty good. So there's that. And you can do it. Now, one final thing is reversing the situation is when in transmedia, when you have video game adaptations of other media. And the record there is also very spotty. Again, it goes way back when, and usually a lot of the it's like, oh, we're gonna have Mission Impossible. We're gonna do a spin-off a video game. It was a side scroller. Everything was a side scroller. Almost everything was a side scroller, right?
Yep.
Some of them are pretty good. I mean, I have because that's the only way you can get them in the States to play them. 2 Macross shoot 'em up games. Macross and Super Dimensional Macross and Super Dimensional and Macross Plus, and they're pretty fun, right? They're shoot 'em ups, shmumps. Yeah. They're shmumps, top down shmumps. They're pretty fun.
You got the many like RPG ones that are based on tabletop games, but I think the most popular one is probably The Witcher.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's actually originally from a novel, even though it's like so far divorced from its source material, from what I hear.
Yeah, that's something completely different. So maybe that's something it is. So transmedia is very possible, and it can be very popular. But I think it has to be, we might need sort of like a super editor
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point is that you got to be careful to not dilute your brand because it's one thing to put out smaller content to keep your fans interested between main installations because video games do take time unless you work for EA.
Hmm.
uh, they so you got to try to keep your fan base interested, but you got to also be careful not to put out too much of it, and you dilute your brand, and you end up making like continuity nightmares as
Right.
well if your media is story based.
I mean, some of my favorite games out there are transmedia. KOTOR. A lot of stuff from Star Wars is transmedia. But also even Star Wars. I think I'm gonna leave it in this note. Star Wars is a great example of transmedia, at least from movies to video games, and I guess back again, because Star Wars has had some extremely cool games attached to it, but it also had some major stinkers as well.
Yeah.
Like some slapdash stuff that's like, oh, let's just put Star Wars in this, and it's a Star Wars game, and it's like, well, this is kind of shitty. Or in the case of EA, you can take a good concept like Star Wars Battlefront and just set it on fire, in a ditch, filled with petrol. If you know the reference to that joke, good on you. I stole it. So I mean, yeah, but one of my favorite games of all time, KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, and I think that shows again adaptation is like they would say, okay, you can make a game tied in with the prequels, right? Because when KOTOR came along, the prequels were going strong, and the Clone Wars, or you can make a game thousands years in the past with some I think relegated to some comic books actually, which were tie-in media to like expanded universe Star Wars before it got rebooted by Disney. And BioWare say, no, okay, we're going to take the 1,000 years old thing because that gives us a lot of freedom to maneuver and do our own thing, right? And I think, well, we're basically now past the hour, but I think in a future episode we're probably going to talk about a version of transmedia which is very interesting. Is when sequels and follow-ups are taking up from one video game to another, which ones are successful, especially those that are handled by other people other than the main producers.
Yeah.
Because, well, that's going to be probably called the Obsidian episode. Because it's a variation on theme. It's not technically transmedia, but kind of is or could be. But for now, I'd like to thank everybody in chat for joining us, including the trolls. Who wanted us to get very specific about certain genitalia for some reason on stream. Sorry, I'm not an OBGYN, so I can't. Yeah, not my job. And so tell us, Chapelmon, where we can find you on the interwebs.
You can find me at Chapelmon pretty much everywhere, and I'm Chapelmon_Aragon on Twitch and on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. And you can find me here as under Lessons Learned 1. Currently playing not that at war. I'm playing BattleTech the game, so you want to see some mech on mech action and some transmedia. Ooh. Lovely transmedia. That will be BattleTech the game. It's a tactical game by Harebrained Scheme Studios, the same makers of Shadowrun, the games. Which is another transmedia product, and you can find the VODs for this and other shows on YouTube under Lessons Learned. And of course, on Saturdays, I'm doing a little bit of transmedia myself because I'm continuing my online design of the tabletop RPG 3980, an 80s themed sci-fi adventure. So thank you all for coming, and as always, we'll see you when we see you. Have a good night.
Good night.